Hey everyone, and welcome to the dark side of healthcare. Quick note before we get started, if you're watching this on YouTube, this is an audio only podcast. So you're going to be looking at our cover art for the duration of the episode. We record in audio format and we push this out to podcast platforms and YouTube so that everyone can find us wherever they like to listen. So if you are on YouTube, welcome. Grab some headphones, get comfortable, go for a walk, do whatever it is that you do when you listen. But the lack of the video is completely intentional. Now, let me introduce who we'll be hearing today. I'm your host, Heather Skousen. I've spent over 20 years working in healthcare operations and leadership, and I hold an MBA with an emphasis in healthcare administration and a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. So when we talk about how these systems fell, I'm not working from an outside looking in. I've been inside these rooms. This shows the intersection of everything I know, and I am glad that you're here to listen for it. Joining me is also my co-host, Dena Diamond, a healthcare industry expert whose clinical and industry knowledge brings an invaluable layer to every case we cover. When we get into how and why of what went wrong, she's not guessing. She's been there. So Dena, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to be here, even when the subject matter is kind of heavy.
And it will be heavy today too. We did a heavy one last week and we're doing another heavy one. So it's gonna be hard. And we also have our guest, Holly, with us today. Holly comes to us with these topics completely fresh. She hasn't been briefed on the case. She doesn't know what's coming. And this is entirely by design. Welcome, Holly.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. And, I am asking questions that I think people want to know, but I could be missing the boat too. I'm just curious sometimes.
Sometimes you're just curious. Nope, exactly. And that's okay, because sometimes ask your questions. Jump in whenever you have any. Today, we're talking about Dr. Farid Fata, an oncologist who practiced in the Detroit, Michigan area. And what he did to his patients is one of the most disturbing betrayals of the doctor-patient relationship in American medical history. This is not just a story about a bad doctor. This is a story about a broken system. So, let's dive in. Imagine you go to your doctor because you're not feeling well. Maybe you're tired. Maybe there's a lump. Maybe your blood work came back with a flag, and your doctor, your oncologist, looks you in the eye and tells you that you have cancer, that you need chemotherapy, and that treatment needs to start immediately. Now imagine that you don't have cancer, that you never did, but you receive chemotherapy anyway because your doctor lied. Not once, not twice, but over years, to hundreds of patients for one reason: money. Between 2009 and 2013, operating out of his oncology practice in the Detroit metro area, he administered unnecessary chemotherapy, unnecessary cancer treatments, and unnecessary diagnostic infusions to patients who were healthy, to patients who were in remission, and to patients who were dying. People kept treating long past any clinical justification. So when you're dying, also, you don't continue doing chemotherapy. But he did it because for every injection, every IV bag he billed to Medicare meant more money in his pocket. Yeah.
It seems like there would have been some type of, at least the ones who are not really ill, that chemo isn't helping because so there would have been this question of why are we continuing to give chemo when it's not making a difference?
Well, because chemo makes you sick, right? So you're automatically going to get sick. But he was the one that was doing all the testing.
That's true.
So nobody's going to be reporting that they didn't have. That they were. You know what I mean?
True. If we fight this, it may work.
Exactly. The Department of Justice estimated that he fraudulently billed Medicare and private insurers for approximately $34 million. The real cost to the bodies, to the lives, and to the families of the people he harmed has no dollar figure. We will quickly go over who Farid Fata is, his crime, and his trial. But as always, our focus is on how this was even allowed to happen and not on the crime itself. Farid Fata was born in Lebanon and trained as a physician there before completing his hematology-oncology fellowship in the United States. He was, by every external measure, a successful and respected doctor. He founded Michigan Hematology Oncology, known as MHO, which grew to multiple clinic locations across Detroit suburbs. Auburn Hills, Clarkston, Lapeer, is that how you say that, Lapeer? Sterling Heights, and others. At its peak, MHO was one of the largest oncology practices in Michigan. He was board certified. He had hospital privileges. He had staff. He had a billing department. He had, by all appearances, a thriving, legitimate medical practice. He was also committing one of the most extensive and deliberate medical fraud schemes ever prosecuted in the United States.
It just, to me, we know and we live in a society where the C word, cancer, is already so scary. So then to have a doctor take advantage of that,
right?
Isn't that terrible?
Yeah.
So we need to say right up front that this was not a case of a doctor who occasionally overtreated or who had poor clinical judgment. The government's case documented systemic, deliberate fraud. Patients diagnosed with cancer who did not have cancer. Patients told their cancer had returned when it had not, and patients in genuine hospice-level decline who were brought in for aggressive chemotherapy that had no possible clinic benefits. This was not sloppiness. It was intentional. Just like you say, he took advantage of the fears.
Yeah, the fear. Exactly. His scheme came to light in 2013, not because a regulatory body caught him, not because of a hospital flagged his outcomes, not because of an insurer's fraud detection system tripped an alarm. It came to light because one of his own employees, a physician assistant named George Karadshaw, Karadshaw? You said you researched the names, Dena. How do we say that?
You've got me on that one.
Okay,
We're going to go with what
we're
you
gonna
said.
go with Karadshaw. Karadshaw
Sure.
went to the FBI. Okay, so I want to kind of make a point that in the last episode that we did last week, it had to be a coworker, and now this is an employee of this.
So essentially another coworker.
Another coworker. Yeah, exactly. George had grown increasingly alarmed by what he was seeing in the clinic. Patients being told that they had cancer when their chart showed no significant diagnosis, treatment plans that made no clinical sense, and a billing operation that seemed designed to maximize revenue rather than respond to patient need. He documented what he saw, and then he made a call.
And that detail, that it took a whistleblower inside the practice to finally surface this, is one of the most important facts of the entire case because it tells us everything about where the system was and was not looking.
Yeah. Fata was arrested in August of 2013. The FBI executed a search warrant in his home and clinics. He was charged with healthcare fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. In September 2014, he pleaded guilty to 13 counts of healthcare fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy to pay and receive kickbacks. At his sentencing in July of 2015, federal judge Paul Borman called Fata's conduct egregious case he had seen in more than 20 years on the bench. Fata was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for Medicare fraud at the time. He is currently incarcerated at FCI Cumberland in Maryland.
And at that sentencing, something unusual and powerful happened. Victims were given the opportunity to speak. Dozens did. Many had received chemotherapy for cancers they never had. Some described permanent nerve damage, a condition called peripheral neuropathy, from unnecessary chemo drugs. Some described losing teeth, losing hair, losing years of their lives to treatments that should never have happened. Others came to speak about family members who had died, who had been subjected to aggressive treatment in their final weeks when they should have just been treated in comfort.
Potter read a statement at sentencing. He said, "I misused my trust, my knowledge, my skill in a criminal way. I had no right to tamper with the sacred trust people gave me. The victims in that courtroom largely did not find that sufficient. Neither did the judge."
You know, it's interesting because isn't there like different levels of crime? Like when you have a position of trust, it makes it more, it's like an aggravated or something like, isn't that right?
I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
And
exactly.
being a doctor, you're in that level of
You're
trust.
in that level. And honestly, I don't think that his apology was frankly enough either,
No. And,
right?
well, because it doesn't even sound like it, even though he said it, it doesn't sound like it was
That it was
Sincere.
sincere.
Mhm.
Yeah. The question that matters most, the ones where we're going to spend the rest of the episode on, is not who Farid Fata was. It's how he was able to do what he did to so many people as he did for as long as he did. I want to frame this section clearly before we dive in. The Fata case is often told as a story of a monstrous individual. And yes, what he did was monstrous. But the reason this case matters beyond just punishing one man is that Farid Fata did not operate in a vacuum. He operated inside a healthcare system, inside a Medicare billing system, inside a state medical licensing system, inside a hospital credentialing system that had multiple opportunities to catch him and failed repeatedly to do so. I mean, is this kind of sounding like a broken record from last week's episode?
Right, yeah.
We're going to go through those failures one by one. Once again, I've divided them out between Dena and I so that she's going to jump in and split some of these out. But Holly, I want you to jump in whenever you have a question.
Okay, you know I will.
Yep.
Let's start with the financial engine of this crime, because without understanding how Medicare pays for oncology services, you cannot understand how Fata ran this scheme for years. Medicare, the federal health insurance program for people over 65 and for people with certain disabilities, pays for chemotherapy and other infusion treatments through what is called Part B. Under Part B, a physician's office bills Medicare for the drugs administered and for the administrative services. The payments can be substantial. A single chemotherapy infusion can generate hundreds or even thousands of dollars in reimbursement. So right there, he already had that knowledge.
Yeah.
Medicare's payment model is fundamentally pay and chase. It processes and pays claims first, then audits afterwards. It does not, as a default, verify clinical appropriateness of treatment before paying. If a provider submits a claim saying a patient received a specific chemotherapy drug, Medicare pays for that claim. The assumption is built into the system that it's the provider that's acting on good faith. Because why would anybody ever file a claim?
Well, why would you administer
someone?
Yeah, why would you
It's not
treat
just
somebody?
filing the claim, you treat them.
Why would you treat somebody who doesn't have cancer?
So it's like, when I think about the episodes that we've gone through so far, we've got on one side situations where insurance is denying.
Yes.
Yeah, like
And then
the Medicare Advantage one where we talked about how they deny.
And then now we're turned around to say that Medicare is just approving these without even
because it's chemotherapy
and
right?
Right. Yeah. And time matters.
Which is really good.
Right.
But then in this case, very bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on, is that because in episode 2, where we talked about the difference between Medicare and Medicare Advantage, and that we did talk about how it is a deeply serious problem, that the system is broken. But there's one thing worth acknowledging there, that had the majority of Fata's patients been enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan, they would have been required to do prior authorization. So they would have been reviewing the clinical on the front end to know whether or not that patient had cancer. They'd be reviewing that clinical. I'm not saying that's the answer, because let's face it, prior authorization is broken and it causes way too many delays in care. But that is something that's different between health, Medicare Advantage and the traditional Medicare. So unnecessary treatments and payments processed automatically. No one's asking why. No one's checking the clinical justification before the money moved. A prior authorization requirement would have put at least one more set of eyes between Fata and the payment. That said, prior authorization is not a clean solution. And you can learn more about that also on Behind the Business of Healthcare if you want to learn more about the prior authorization problem in healthcare. The short version, it creates its own category of harm, but in the specific context of what Fata was doing, it is a friction point that was simply not there.
Correct. The DOJ estimated he submitted approximately $150 million in faults.
Say that again.
$150 submitted.
No,
150 million.
I changed my wording. Million in false and fraudulent claims over the course of his scheme, of which Medicare and private insurers paid out roughly $34 million. The gap between billed and paid reflects normal insurance processing, not detection of fraud. Most of the unpaid claims were denied for routine billing reasons, not because anyone suspected wrongdoing.
Okay, so wait a minute though, because he was administering the chemo. He was doing all that. So what was his benefit? Because he needed to be paying for these treatments. He needed to be getting all of those things. I mean, I realize
Right.
that there's a
The cost to
the
him.
markup
Yeah,
is
exactly. The margin.
Mhm.
That's why.
was-
It's because
okay.
the margin.
And if he was doing more of these in his office than a hospital setting, he's
then truth,
recouping
it's
more.
of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Medicare fraud, and Medicare does have fraud detection. Like they have a system in place. So here's the question: why didn't it work here?
Medicare's fraud detection at the time relied heavily on statistical pattern analysis, flagging providers whose billing patterns were unusual compared to their peers. But oncology is a specialty where high volume, high cost billing is expected. An oncology practice billing for large volumes of chemotherapy drugs does not automatically stand out as an outlier the way a general practitioner billing the same might. So Fata was hiding in the statistical noise of his own specialty.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And did Medicare system, like, did they flag? Like, did they flag anything before the FBI got involved?
There is some evidence that some of his billing patterns did generate scrutiny from Medicare contractors, the private companies that process Medicare claims on behalf of CMS.
So, like the Medicare Advantage.
Right, the Advantage plans. But the follow-up was inadequate. So it flagged something, but nobody would really check in. A 2015 Senate Finance Committee investigation found that Medicare contractors had identified billing anomalies associated with Fata's practice, but that the response did not include clinical review of his patient records or escalation to law enforcement. So they noticed something
They
unusual.
noticed something, but they didn't look at the
They
clinical
sure
to see
didn't
if there was any.
pursue it. No, they did not.
Man. Okay. Let's talk about his medical license. Fata was a licensed physician in the state of Michigan. He held that license throughout his entire scheme. The Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, known as LARA, did not revoke his license until after his federal arrest. The question is, should there have been earlier action? Medical licensing in the United States is a state function. Each state has its own medical board. In Michigan, as in most states, the board investigates complaints from patients, from other providers, and from hospitals. It does not proactively monitor clinical practice.
That's what I was just going to ask. But he wasn't getting complaints because
right.
nobody knew that they weren't sick.
So, but because nobody's looking for patterns,
Right.
because this is only based off of complaints. It does not audit treatment decisions. It does not have the authority or the resources to review whether a physician's patient records reflect appropriate medical care. It waits for the complaint to come in.
And like we said, were there complaints?
Yeah, there was evidence that patients that they did have files, some complaints, but both with the state medical board and with the hospital systems where Fata held privileges. So there were some complaints. The Senate Finance Committee investigation found the warning signs existed years before his arrest. Some patients or their families had raised concerns about their diagnosis and treatment plans. Those complaints did not trigger an investigation that reached his clinical records. So once again, the complaints did not pull the medical records.
Well, and I mean, you think about that's why we have people who go get second opinions because they may not agree with the doctors.
And we're going to talk about that a
I
little
promise
bit.
you, I'll tell you
Yeah,
about that.
Okay.
Yep, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Which gets to a core structural problem. A complaint-driven oversight model is fundamentally reactive. It only responds to what it receives. And patients with cancer, or patients who believe they have cancer, are often the least positioned to question their doctor's authority. They're scared, they're sick, and they believe, or at least they believe they're sick, and they trust the person in the white coat. There's a lot of authority and trust in that, right?
Yeah.
That power imbalance is absolutely central to why Fata's scheme worked. Oncology patients are among the most vulnerable in all of medicine. You receive a cancer diagnosis and your entire world narrows to, what do I do to survive?
I can tell you right now, that would be me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You are not in a position to second guess your oncologist treatment recommendation. You don't have the training to read your own blood work and say, this doesn't indicate that my doctor says what it indicates. The information irregularity between a board certified oncologist and a frightened patient was exploited completely by Fata. He knew that his patients had no ability to question him.
Well, yeah.
Because they didn't have the skill or the background or the knowledge.
Well, no, and you've been feeling tired or not well. What took you to the doctor?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Fata had hospital privileges, meaning he was credentialed to admit and treat patients at hospital facilities in Detroit area. Hospital credentialing is supposed to be another layer of quality oversight. Dena's going to tell us about why this layer failed.
Hospital credentialing verifies that a physician has the qualifications they claim: their degree, their board certification, their malpractice history, their licensing status. What it does not typically do is evaluate the clinical quality of a physician's ongoing practice. You are credentialed based on your credentials, not based on a review of your actual patient outcomes of your prescribing patterns. Once you have privileges, the assumption is that you are practicing appropriately unless someone complains.
So basically, credentialing is a background check. It's not a quality review.
Exactly. And even the background check has gaps. The National Practitioner Data Bank, which tracks malpractice payments and disciplinary actions against physicians, is required to query during credentialing. But Fata had no significant prior malpractice records and no prior disciplinary actions before his arrest.
Okay, so one of my questions that this is making me think of is this like a one and done review as far as like a background check?
credentialing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I
one
mean,
of
usually
these,
it is.
once you get credentialed at a hospital, there's no reason to keep checking your credentials.
Right. So once you get past that initial
Well, I mean,
background
I
check.
will say that there are some things in
Yes.
place now. Like, so there are some things in place. Like, I know that in our area, whenever our providers needed to get credentialed, they do go through a re-credentialing process with the hospital every year.
Okay, but at this time,
But at this
it was
time-
one of those things where you could,
And
once
not
you
every
got
hospital,
past,
not every hospital does it.
Yeah.
Not every hospital
Yeah.
does it every year.
Yeah, and he would have passed a standard
He
credentialing
would
check
have,
anyway.
because it's just a background check.
Yeah.
It's verifying, do
That's-
you have a license? Do
that's
you
what
know,
I
like,
mean, yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's not going to check patterns.
Yeah, some of these things happened in his practice. And, so his clinical decision making, not in his credentials, and credential review is not designed to find.
Yeah, it's not designed to find it. So the other thing that I think is interesting is I know that in our area, with one of the larger hospital organizations we have in our area, they will do peer reviews. And so that is part of the credentialing process that's also not happening here. Is that, a lot of hospitals aren't doing peer reviews. They're not asking for somebody to give, put
Feedback.
their own license behind somebody, their recommendation of saying that, yes, this person should
Yeah.
be given privileges, right? There's also the question about whether the hospitals where he had privileges notice anything through their internal quality processes.
The Senate Finance Committee report raised this directly. It found that the hospital systems with which Fata was affiliated did not have robust mechanisms for tracking the clinical outcomes of outpatient physicians who primarily practiced in their own offices.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of his infusions happened at his own clinical
Got
locations.
most of his money.
Yep. Not in the hospital facilities, like we said earlier. Hospital quality oversight simply wasn't looking in the right places.
Yeah. I want to talk about something that goes beyond Fata specifically, because it's a structural issue that his case made impossible to ignore. The way oncology practices are paid in the United States has historically created financial incentives towards more treatment rather than less. Under the Medicare Part B reimbursement model that existed during Fata's scheme, and that still largely exists today, oncologists are paid a percentage markup over their cost for the drug they administered. So you asked, why would he do that? And it's because of his margin. So if a physician purchases a chemotherapy drug for, say, $1,000, they can bill Medicare an average sales price plus 6%. The more expensive the drug, the more infusions administered, the more revenue generated, right? So that's why it was important for him to go for the expensive drugs and the infusions, because he was going to get more for it. This is sometimes called the buy and bill model. So a physician who administers more chemotherapy makes more money. Now, the overwhelming majority of oncologists practices ethically within the structure. They make treatment decisions based on clinical evidence, not on revenue. But the structure itself creates a conflict of interest. And when you have a provider who is willing to exploit that conflict, who is willing to let financial incentives override clinical judgment entirely, the system provides almost no friction. You can bill for more treatment, and the billing system pays without asking why. You kind of brought up something in one of our previous episodes about how that the system allows somebody who, if they have a criminal intent, like that, it's going to open the door for them,
Right. Yeah.
to do that.
Right. And then Fata took this most extreme expression. diagnosing cancer that wasn't there and billing for treatment that was never clinically indicated. But the infrastructure he used to do that was a legal billing model that every oncology practice uses. He didn't create a new system, he weaponized the existing one.
Yeah. It's one of the most uncomfortable parts of the entire case. The incentive existed. He just took it to the criminal extreme, and the system couldn't tell the difference, at least not fast enough. Here's something that I think will strike our listeners as as a very basic question. If a doctor tells you that you have cancer and need to start chemotherapy immediately, is anyone else verifying that diagnosis before treatment begins?
Well,
This is where you ask the
Uh-huh.
second opinion question.
Right. And I'm going to guess because I can't imagine, I haven't had to go through it, but I can't imagine being in that doctor's room, hearing
Oh,
you have cancer and we
right.
need to start treatment
Immediately.
immediately, and thinking,
Mhm.
well, I'm going to see if I can get into
To
another
another
doctor.
specialist that I also have to wait several weeks,
weeks
sometimes
for.
months to get
Right.
into.
So if I'm hearing that I need to start immediately, I'm not going to take the chance to do a second
No,
opinion.
you're calling your
Dina has-
family
yeah, Dina
members
has
and
an answer
you're
for you.
hurting. But in most cases, no. There is no regulatory requirement in the US that a cancer diagnosis be confirmed by a second physician before treatment begins. There is no mandatory external pathology review, which I have to say, some would probably be frustrated if
Yeah,
that was put
exactly.
in.
Why do I have to
the
go get a
system.
second
One more
opinion?
thing
Yeah,
of
one
why
more
are they
thing.
trying to stop my treatment?
Yeah.
There is no insurer pre-authorization process that verifies the underlying diagnosis as opposed to just the treatment being billed. The system trusts the treating physician completely.
Which in the vast majority of the cases is appropriate.
I was just going to say, that's the thing, is these cases are the one-offs.
Mhm.
They're not the majority
norm.
of
Exactly.
the
Yeah, they're not the norm.
physicians.
Most oncologists are not Farid Fata.
Mhm.
But the absence of any verification mechanism means that when you are someone like Farid Fata, there is nothing between him and the patient.
Well, and I could see doctors not only being upset with how that would delay the process, but it would question their ethical practice. And if they
Yeah, they're
are
under
practicing
true.
like
ethically,
they're like, why am I under the microscope? I am doing everything that I'm
Right,
supposed to be doing.
exactly.
I do care about the patients. I am taking care of them to the best of my ability, and now I'm being scrutinized.
yeah.
And Fata actively exploited the urgency dynamic in oncology. He would tell the patients they needed to start treatment immediately. Cancer has a powerful psychological urgency attached to it. Patients and families do not want to lose time. They do not want to slow down. He used that fear to prevent certain patients from seeking second opinions. In some documented cases, he actively discouraged patients from consulting other physicians. Would you question your physician if he
Depends on how he framed it. If he was like, yeah, by all means, go get a second opinion, but that is going to delay your care,
That is
and
critical
that is
time.
critical time for us to get, you
So
started
then
on
you
your
would
treatment.
be ready
So
to
then
go.
you would probably not seek that second opinion. If it was a matter of, nope, what, I really don't think you need a second opinion. I'm all you need to know. Like, I have all the information you need
Right.
to know. Like, that would maybe be a red flag.
But he's going to frame
But
it as
yeah,
its
he's gonna
crucial
frame it.
time
Mhm.
frame. And here is the detail that I find hardest to sit with. Some of Fata's patients did seek that second opinion. They went to other oncologists.
Oh.
Yep. And in several cases, those other oncologists told them they did not have cancer or that their cancer was in remission. That would be a hard one, wouldn't it?
That would be hard, because then who do you believe?
Mhm,
Who do you
because
believe?
in
Yeah.
the end, you would think, why is somebody telling me I have
Yeah,
it? And
yeah.
this one is saying I
And
don't.
it's not like
I need
you're
to
not gonna go get a
err
third
on the
opinion.
side
Yeah,
of
err on the side of caution and
Yep,
do the
exactly.
treatment.
And we hear those stories of situations where misdiagnoses, and it's more devastating when it's a misdiagnosis
Right,
on the
yeah.
that they say they weren't. So I'm going to fall.
I'm gonna
towards
fall,
the-
Sometimes you
yeah.
want the answer. You
Yeah,
want a answer,
answer.
not the bad answer always, but you kind of want to know
Yeah.
why you're feeling the way you are. So those patients that went back to Fata and reported that what they had been told, that they didn't have cancer or that they were in remission, and and Fata persuaded them that the second opinion was wrong.
So he talked them out of the correct answer.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, he did. And that is a feature of the information irregularity we talked about earlier. When a world renowned specialist, as Fata presented himself, tells a scared patient that the other doctor is mistaken, many patients will believe the specialist. And that's the authority of the white coat that is powerful. But yet you had another white coat tell you. But like I say, it's the fear.
It's the
You're
fear.
driven-
This is all on the fear.
Well,
Exactly.
and the other thing is that, you say there that a world renowned. How many of us go into a doctor's office and we see on their wall all of their degrees and then go home and go, did Dr. Fata really graduate from da 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 da? Is he really
You're not doing your own background check, is what you're saying.
right,
Yeah,
but
you're not going to spend that time because
we're-
you trust what's on the wall.
trust
You
what's on the wall and the white
and-
coat.
yeah.
And we don't really, when we hear that this is a great doctor, we go with the recommendation.
But in some ways, would he have had good reviews though? Because there were patients who didn't have
Yes.
cancer that he cured.
True. Oh, that's true. Yeah,
So
exactly.
would it have been? This was great.
He's
cured.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, this is true. I want to spend some time on the whistleblower piece because it's both a thing that worked and is in some ways another indictment of the system. George Karedisha, the physician assistant who went to the FBI, is by any measure a hero in the story. He noticed what was happening. He documented it. He reported it. And because of him, Fata was stopped. But here's the question. Why was he the only line of defense? We talked about whistleblowing in the Charles Cullen episode last week.
Yep.
And how healthcare has created a culture where you do not report on your colleagues. If you missed that episode, I highly recommend you go back to listen to it. It is also a heavy topic, so be forewarned, but it's well worth the listen. George worked inside the same practice as Fata. He had access to patient charts and could see the discrepancy between what the charts showed and what patients were being told. He was clinically trained enough to recognize that what Fata was doing was wrong. And he was, by all accounts, deeply troubled by what he saw, to the point where he felt he had no choice but to report it. But he also faced real professional risk in doing so. Whistleblowing against an employer is not just career neutral. It's not like you're not reporting on a colleague or a coworker. He is your boss.
Yeah.
The False Claim Act provides some financial protection and reward for whistleblowings who report Medicare fraud. George was entitled to a portion of any government recovery under the QTAM. Is that QTAM? I know. Dena did remind me that she only had to worry about her paragraphs, and I did not do my due diligence in making sure I knew how to pronounce everything. Provisions for that act. I'll go into that in a bit more. False Claim Act provisions exist specifically to encourage insiders to come forward because the government cannot be everywhere, and they have been effective. The DOJ has recovered billions of dollars in healthcare fraud through false claim cases. But the mechanism is entirely dependent on there being an insider who was willing to come forward. If George had decided the risk was too high and he left, or that he had left the practice or had simply persuaded himself that he was misreading the situation, Fata might not have been discovered for several more years. And there were other people in that practice. There were nurses, billing staff, other physicians. One of the questions that was raised but never fully answered was how many people saw things that troubled them that said nothing.
Now I have to wonder in billing, would
you have caught
would I have
anything?
wondered, or did I just feel like all the patients that
Maybe
came
not
to him
you on the billing
actually
side, but a coder might have, because coders are supposed to be determining the code off of
his
clinical.
which he's saying, are they looking
But
at
they're
imaging?
saying that George found out that the clinical wasn't supporting the treatment. So he wasn't actually falsifying the medical record. It sounds like the medical record still wasn't saying this
Didn't he
patient
have
had,
to say they had cancer, but maybe
had
he
to
did
say
not
cancer,
specify
but maybe he
with
didn't
imaging?
maybe he
Right.
didn't have the labs that supported it, or maybe he didn't have the imaging that
Something that
supported it.
had
Something
George call
else
it
that
out.
George was able to recognize was
Was the
false.
gap.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. The coder probably wouldn't have caught it
No.
because the coder only bases their coding off of the physician note.
Right, and I believe he would have
Yeah.
had to say something
Yeah.
in there.
Well, wouldn't he have, in order for Medicare to cover it?
Most of the times they didn't require prior authorization, and
well-
it's only on the back end. So yes, he would need to say
If
something
Medicare had chose to
for
audit
the claim.
his claim
Okay.
after the fact, because that's what Medicare does.
does,
They don't
yeah.
actually go after it in the beginning. They audit on the back end. He would have to have the clinical to support.
And he was just
Have the
banking on
bill.
that, potentially that
But that was the whole thing, is that Medicare is used to oncologists submitting such high levels of claims for chemotherapy
So
that it didn't
raise a
flag
flag.
anything.
If there was an audit, it would just be to say, you didn't have this in here.
Right.
That's why we pulled this
Exactly.
money back.
Yeah, exactly. The culture of deference to physician authority in medical settings, particularly towards a physician who owns the practice, is profound. Staff may have noticed things. Some may have rationalized them. Some may have been afraid of losing their jobs. The organizational culture of that practice made speaking up extraordinarily difficult for anyone other than someone with George's combination of clinical knowledge, moral clarity, and personal courage.
So I know that both of you worked in a privately owned clinic. I mean, you had lots of doctors, but I think that would be really hard, even in your guys' positions. You weren't medically trained
Yeah.
staff.
That's why Dena asked the question, how would somebody
Yeah.
in billing even catch something like this?
But even if you started to wonder and question how hard it would be to go to the doctors
Who's going to listen to you?
Exactly.
A coder.
and we even talked about that in the first episode about insurance, of they are the trained people.
Yeah.
Like if in other insurance companies they're being denied by doctors who don't know, why would a office manager or a billing specialist
or even a medical assistant and a nurse, like why would they know more than the physician?
Oncologist?
Yeah. 100%. Here's something that came out of the victim testimony at sentencing that I want to make sure we address. Many of Fata's patients did not know or did not feel empowered to act on the fact that they had the legal right to access their own medical records and take them to another physician. Dena, I'm going to have you take this one.
Okay. Under HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, patients do have a legal right to access and receive copies of their medical records. That is a firm legal right. In practice, however, many patients do not know they have it, or do not feel empowered to exercise it, or face practical barriers. Records requests can be slow, there can be fees involved, and it can be discouraged by providers. Fata's practice, according to testimony, sometimes made it difficult for patients to get their own records.
And without your records, it's going to be harder to get a meaningful second opinion.
Exactly. A second opinion without access to the original pathology reports, the imaging, the lab reports is essential, and an incomplete consultation without them. You need the underlying data. Fata's control over the data was another tool of control over his patients.
Yeah. Let's talk about what Fata's case actually changed, because this was a landmark prosecution, the longest Medicare fraud sentence in history at the time. It produced some reform and it accelerated conversations that were already beginning. So let's go through the most significant changes. First, Medicare has invested significantly in predictive analytics and fraud detection since 2013. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services implemented what's called the Fraud Prevention System. It's a set of algorithms that analyze claim data in near real time to flag suspicious patterns before payment. By 2018, CMS reported that the system had helped prevent and detect billions of dollars in improper payments. That's real progress. I'm not going to lie about that. But the pay and chase model has not been fundamentally restructured. CMS still processes an enormous volume of claims with limited prepayment clinical review. The scale of Medicare it covers approximately 65 million Americans. Wow. Makes comprehensive pre-authorization for all services impossible without creating dangerous access delays for legitimate care, because we don't want to obviously create the other issue, which is delaying care. This is genuine tension. It's not a simple policy failure. Second, the Fata case was a significant driver behind improving seniors' timely access to Care Act, which was signed into law in 2022. That law reforms Medicare Advantage prior authorization requirements, trying to streamline legitimate care while adding better guardrails against unnecessary treatment. It doesn't solve everything, but it reflects that Congress took the structural billing incentive problem seriously.
Okay, so what about the state medical licensing piece?
Okay, so this is where progress has been slower and more uneven. The Federation of State Medical Boards has pushed for better interstate information sharing so that if a physician is disciplined in one state, cannot simply move to another and start fresh. The FSMB's physician data center is improved, but state medical boards remain substantially under-resourced. In 2018 report from the Lawn Institute found that the majority of physicians who receive serious disciplinary actions continue to practice. The complaint-driven model persists, which means another Fata could theoretically practice for years before a complaint-driven system caught up with him.
Okay, so they have all these complaints and they still get to practice?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. What would make a real difference is proactive outcome monitoring, tracking mortality and complication rates by individual physicians and flagging outliers for review.
I don't think patients would complain about that.
No, exactly. They wouldn't. Random clinical audits of high billing oncology practices, like basically, go to the specialties that are billing these high volumes and see, are you an outlier in that specialty, right? Mandatory second opinion requirements for certain diagnoses before high cost treatment begins, which we kind of did talk about. That could be a problem because it's kind of like, well, why do I now have to go get a second opinion
Well, and especially
before
if
I
it's
can get
critical.
care? Better patient education about the right to access records and seek second opinions. And perhaps most importantly, as we talked about in the last episode, a cultural shift inside medicine that destigmatizes second opinions and positions them as a standard part of good care rather than a challenge to a physician's authority.
Don't make
I
it
guess we
really
didn't really talk
difficult
about
for us,
that,
but
but yeah.
but I mean, make it easier to get in and get a second opinion.
Yeah,
Help,
exactly. I want to be clear about something. Placing the burden entirely on the patient is itself a systemic failure. Sick people should not have to be their own fraud investigators.
Mhm.
But there are things patients can do. You can request your records, every test result, every pathology report, every scan. You have a legal right to all of it.
So if you were requesting your records, do you have to ask for everything? Or if you say, hey, I want a copy of my records,
You can
do
get
they
specific. You can be very generic.
They should
But
give them.
they
they
should
should
give you
right, if I
everything.
contacted my doctor and said I wanted a copy of my records, that should be enough to say everything.
It should.
Or would they just send me my paper that
Sometimes, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that came up in what Dena talked about is that his office, whether it was him who instigated those policies within his
Right.
office, but they made it very difficult
to
for
get 'em.
people to get their records. So in theory, yes, you should be able to call your doctor's office and say, I'd like a complete copy of my records. But it sounds like that if you're asking for records from somebody who is already doing something criminal,
but they're not
they're
gonna
not going to make that process easier for you,
yeah.
which could be a red flag in and of itself.
Which once again, his own clinical is probably not going to give you much.
You need
so
the
you
labs.
are needing the
You
labs.
need
You
the
are
imaging,
needing
yeah.
the imaging
And
reports.
you can get, if you had your labs done or the imaging done at a hospital, you don't have to go through the doctor who ordered it for you.
Right.
You can call the hospital to get that stuff for your records. So, seek a second opinion for any serious diagnosis and do not let urgency rhetoric stop you. A legitimate oncologist will support you getting a second opinion. Question any physician who actively discourages you from seeking one, and know that if something feels wrong about your diagnosis, about your treatment, or about the pace and volume of your appointments, you're allowed to ask questions and you're allowed to leave.
It's true.
You don't have to stay. Farid Fata is serving 45 years in federal prison for the hundreds of patients he harmed, some of whom will live with the physical consequences of unnecessary chemotherapy for the rest of their lives, some of whom died.
Well,
There
and
is- yeah.
the other thing is, we know that chemo, some of those consequences then create other
Health problems.
problems.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. There's only the hope that what he did is not forgotten, and that the systems that failed to stop him are held to account for that failure. The thing I keep coming back to in this case is that the system trusted him completely. Medicare trusted him completely. The licensing board trusted him. The hospitals trusted him. His patients, of course, why wouldn't they? Trusted him. And he knew that. He built his entire scheme on the assumption that no one would look closely enough. For 4 years, he was right. Dena, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do. My final thought is this, that his case is extreme.
Yeah.
What he did is not what most doctors do, but the structural vulnerabilities he exploited He had the billing incentives, the absent clinical oversight, the deference to physician authority, the under-resourced state boards. Those are not extreme. Those are features of the system that every patient in America interacts with. Reform is not just about stopping the next Farid Fata. It is about building a system that genuinely puts the patient first, not as a slogan, but as a design principle. We are not there yet.
Yeah, I think that in all of our episodes, I feel like we're constantly a broken record because we are always saying that the system needs to get better for patients.
Yeah.
Well, it does. And it's really, when you hear these sort of extreme or lying cases, it's sad for me. It's sad for everyone because of the fact that we then take these to heart more than realizing that
the good that's actually happening.
Because this is what really can shut things down. And it's possible to happen to us, but get that second opinion.
Exactly. Holly, thanks for being with us today. Your questions, as always, are very thoughtful and thought-provoking. Is there anything else that you'd like to ask before we sign off?
No, I'm disappointed in myself.
Because I
didn't have a movie. I didn't, but
was this one so heavy that you just couldn't come up with movies?
Go there, yeah. And what it makes me think about is trust.
Yes,
we blindly trust, and maybe it's not blindly. We trust people because of the experience, because of the name, because of the training that we believe that individual has, and we need to take more ownership of our own experiences. But that, I don't want that to sound like I'm blaming the patients.
No, you're not.
But we can't just go in and blindly trust people because there are people out there trying to take advantage of.
They're in that position of power. So we get used to not questioning that when it is our healthcare, like we've kind of said all along. Yeah. But it's really sad when it's fear-based.
Yeah, that's the part that gets me on this one, is that it's cancer patients where they are one of the most vulnerable patients, and it is like he fed off of that fear, knowing that he was going to get patients who weren't going to question him because of the fear.
I can tell you, I really am not sure I would have, or I would. I mean,
after this case, I would say after researching this case, maybe I would be more inclined to get a second opinion, and it wouldn't be because I'm just not going to trust doctors, because I will trust doctors. But when it's something that serious,
and what
maybe
form of treatment is best, maybe this one offers something a little bit different.
Well, and I think when we go back to the idea that the system is broken, we need to figure out how do we correct the system so that when a patient is looking for a second opinion, it's not a 6-week
get them in sooner.
Wait, right? Yeah. Well, there's got to be something out there that, I have this terminal diagnosis potentially.
That should get you to the top of the line.
Yeah, and I'm being told that I need to do this treatment, but I don't know if it's the best treatment for me. How do I get
and sometimes a second opinion, if they have access, like we talked about, if they have access to those medical records and those labs and the imaging, sometimes that can be reviewed before you even get in for the appointment, right? And that's what they usually like to do, is review that before you get into an appointment. So that should get you in the door sooner because you have all of that.
And if you're in a system that shares information, like that should make it a little easier too, in that you could go to somebody
who is in the same network, in the same organization. Yeah.
Maybe not the same location, but same network.
Yeah, exactly. As always, the links to everything we referenced today are in the show notes, including patient rights resources, how to request your medical records, and the Senate Finance Committee report on Fata's case, which is generally illuminating. It's a document. It's a document that if you want to get in deeper, by all means, jump into that. The dark side will be back next week. Subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and if something feels wrong, say something. We'll see you next time, because there is always more.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Dark Side of Healthcare, presented by Behind the Business of Healthcare.